One. First off, this is not a speech, right? That's why I don't stand behind a podium. I never like standing behind podiums. This is a conversation with all of you. And more importantly, and I speak at Chabad houses across the country. More importantly, this could be one of the most important speeches I've given. And I speak in front of hundreds of thousands of people a night. Now, why do I say that? I say that because this speech tonight is part of a pact, a deal I made with the Rebbe. We use the term miracle a lot in news. Do any of you watch news? Local news? They love terms like that. Miracle. It was a miracle. It was a miracle. It was a miracle. Why? Because audiences connect with that word. If you really want to see a miracle, the fact that I'm here tonight on Super Bowl Sunday, okay, is a miracle. And tonight's talk and conversation is going to be about the path that led me from beyond a non-observant Jew to being here tonight for Yud Shvat on Super Bowl Sunday. That journey really begins with my father of blessed memory. And this speech is really in honor of my father, Chaim Yitzhak ben Yechiel Moshe, may his neshama have an aliyah. Because my father was in large part responsible for me being here tonight. And it's fascinating because my father grew up in a different generation. My grandfather, Yechiel Moshe, came from Poland in the early 1900s. And he was one of the Jews that when he reached America, he threw his tefillin overboard. Because he was a part of a group of Jews that were tired of being beaten up, tired of being persecuted. Make sure you text her. Okay. He was tired of being persecuted, and he was tired of simply going through a difficult time for being a Jew. So he came to America, and he opened up a tailor shop in the South Bronx called The American. My father grew up in a generation where communism was idolized, where theater was idolized, where there was always the cultural sense of being Jewish, but it ended there. And what's really fascinating about all of this is you realize how quickly it goes. It's a very pertinent message today. Because from Yechiel Moshe, my father went to the Columbia Dental School, and all of a sudden, he was raising very secular children in Westchester County, New York. So secular, I have to tell all of you this, that where I grew up in Rye, New York, there was one Reform place, and the rabbi of that place later converted to Buddhism. That's a true story. That's the environment in which I grew up. An environment where there was more than a 70% intermarriage rate. An environment where Jewish children didn't even know what being Jewish was all about. And then in 1986, everything changed. My parents got divorced, and my father loved the stock market. And there was a big crash, and he had lost almost everything. Now remember, my father's background was of this kind of communist, anarchist, intellectualism. And there at the door was who? An emissary of the Lubavitcher Rebbe who knocked at the door in Rye, New York. Now, when my father saw this guy, let me say his name. His name is Reuven Flamer. My father saw Rabbi Flamer. The first thing he said is, "This is a bad day to come and ask for a donation." And Rabbi Flamer said, no, I'm not asking for a donation. And he was smart enough to say to my father, "What's wrong?" And my father said, "What's wrong? I'm getting divorced. I'm losing all my money. I don't know if I'll be able to keep my house. I have 5 children who are disconnected from Judaism. What do you mean? What's going on?" So Reuven Flamer did something that day that really changed the course of not only my father's life, but my life, my brother's life, and generations of Jewish lives. What did Reuven Flamer do? It was a Sunday, and he drove my father right here. And the Rebbe was standing there giving out dollars. Now here's part 1 of the story, which is absolutely incredible. My father always wore a white coat. You know, he was the dentist. And they get in front of the Rebbe, and Rabbi Flamer explained to the Rebbe that this is a dentist from Rye, New York, secular dentist, and the Rebbe spoke to my father in Yiddish. That in itself was incredible because my father's first language was Yiddish. Now, how the Rebbe knew that this secular dentist knew how to speak fluent Yiddish, I'll never know. And he asked my father in Yiddish, "What is troubling you?" And my father told him very quickly, because as you know in dollars, you're pushed along. My father said, "I've lost all my money. There's sholem bias issues, and my children are not connected to Judaism." So the Rebbe said, "Trach gut v'zayin gut," right? And my father was ushered along, and then the Rebbe called my father back, which, as you know, was also very rare. And the Rebbe gave my father a very unique blessing. He told my father, "You can have anything you wish for." You see, I believe that in 1987, the Rebbe knew that I would be standing here right now inspiring you. Because all my father wanted was to have Jewish children and Jewish grandchildren. He was already up in his years at that point, and he recognized and realized after making millions and losing millions and making millions and losing millions that the only thing that mattered was continuity. And he realized that he was losing that day by day living in Rye, New York. And what was really interesting about that, and I have to tell everybody this, is that even though at the time I didn't wear a yarmulke, there are still yacht clubs, if you go look at Rye, New York, that, at least at the time, and I still believe to this day, have a limited membership of Jews. And I remember going with friends to these clubs, and their parents would pick me up, and they would say, "Are you bringing your Jewish friend home?" I wasn't wearing a yarmulke. I wasn't outwardly Jewish, but to them, I was the Jew. So if I was the Jew anyway, why not be proud of it? Right? If they saw me as the Jew anyway, why not really be a Jew? At the same time all of this was going on, my father, who loved the theater, took me on an open audition for a Broadway show, which I was cast in. I was the original Patrick Dennis in Mame on Broadway with Angela Lansbury. I was in the original 9 that won the Tony Award on Broadway. I was in Oliver on Broadway. I did the national tour of Member of the Wedding, Pippin. By the time I was 11 years old, I was on Broadway 3 times. Now, they were good child actors. I don't know if any child actor has that record. My father, though, was so inspired by meeting the Rebbe, he took my younger brother out of public school and put him into a Dara Torah. I would finish a very successful career on Broadway, and I went out to Los Angeles, California, to continue to try to make that transition from child actor to adult actor. I met my wife the very first day of college. We got married at 19 years of age, so I was Lubavitch even before I knew I was Lubavitch. Right? And it was a Friday in Los Angeles, and I had run out of money. Literally, I'd run out of money. And I called my father up and I said, "Dad, I need you to Western Union me money." And he said, "What for?" I said, "Food." And he said, "What have you done with all your money?" And I said, "I spent it on pizza and beer." And he said, "Listen, Rashi, instead of you getting Western Union money from me, why don't you go to the Chabad house in Santa Monica?" I said, "All right, Dad. What am I going to get there?" He goes, "You'll get a nice meal, but why don't you go down there?" So I did that. I took my wife down to the Chabad house in Santa Monica, Rabbi Levitensky. This was 1992. And we pull up, it's already Shabbos, right? I'm wearing shorts, my wife's wearing shorts, the place is packed. We had no idea what was going on, really. We walk into this Chabad house, and all of a sudden, Rabbi Levitensky, who was this, for those of you who knew him, he had this jolly face and this big body. He comes running over to me, and he gives me a big bear hug. And he says, "Rashi, welcome." I look back on that and I think it's incredible because this Chabad house was full of people. He didn't stop me and say, "What are you wearing?" or "Who are you?" or "What's your name?" or "Why is your wife wearing shorts?" or "Why are you wearing shorts?" He said, "Rashi, how are you? Come and make Kiddush." I said, "Rabbi Levitensky, I don't know how to make Kiddush. I don't know how to read Hebrew." He said, "Not a problem. We're going to go through it word by word." So I took the Kiddush cup, and word by word by word, he went through Kiddush with me. Rabbi Levitensky never really saw what became of my wife and I. But it was that simple act of goodness and kindness from an emissary of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which once again changed generations. Because after I went to college in Los Angeles, and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, on a whim I applied to the Columbia School of Journalism, Columbia University. I figured if I was going to go to journalism school, I would try to go to the best one. Somehow, I got into the Columbia School of Journalism. I became more and more involved in Yiddishkeit. My little brother went off to college in Buffalo and became very influenced by Rabbi Greenberg in Buffalo, New York. And I got my first job in Naples, Florida. Now, Naples, Florida is about 2 hours west of Miami, right? So on the west coast of Florida, it was just like being in Rye, New York again. There was at the time, one Reform place. But that year, in 1997, I said, this is the year I'm going to go to shul for Rosh Hashanah. And my wife and I drive on Pine Ridge Road. We get to the shul. There's a guy standing outside the shul with a portable credit card machine. And he said, do you have your tickets? I said, don't have my tickets. He said, not a problem. You can purchase the tickets right now. I said, okay, how much are they? He said, $350 a ticket. My first job in Naples as a TV reporter, I was making $19,000 a year. So yes, true story. So $350 a ticket. I can't afford that. He goes, not to worry, it includes Yom Kippur as well. The tickets are good for both. I said, sir, I can't afford the tickets. I can't do it. So he says, well, then you can't come in to the synagogue. And I remember walking away, and I don't even know why I did this. I turned back and I said, you know what? You should be embarrassed to call yourself a Jew. From my experience with people like Rabbi Levitinsky and the Rebbe, all they talked about was bringing Jews in. And here I want to come to shul and you're telling me I can't come in? But it was the biggest blessing because I became hungry to live in a Jewish community. But I had a problem. I was a reporter in Naples. Now, the way the TV markets work is that Naples is like Market 84. And Jewish communities, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Miami are top markets. You don't go from Naples to Miami. So I needed a miracle. So my father said, we're going to do something about this, Rashi. I said, Dad, what are we going to do? He said, I'm going to go to the Ohel. And I feel so strongly about this that I'm going to mail myself the letter, right? So you would always have a copy of it. I have this letter at home, by the way. And my father wrote the following. He said, Dear Rebbe, please bless my son Rashi with a job at WSVN in Miami. Now, why did he say this? At the time in Miami lived Rabbi Greenberg's daughter, who lived near the shul of Bal Harbor. And I had visited Rabbi Greenberg's daughter, and I couldn't believe it. There were kosher restaurants and a big shul. So my father wrote in WSVN in Miami, which is 10 minutes from the shul of Bal Harbor. And in exchange, my father wrote, Rashi will not work on Shabbos. My father drops off the letter. I said, Dad, what did you write? This is the TV news business, right? This is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But I thought to myself, what are the odds of me getting a call from WSVN in Miami, right? 6 weeks later, I got a call from WSVN in Miami. And we talk about miracles and whether the Rebbe's here or the Rebbe's not here. Let me tell you, when I was driving across Alligator Alley from Naples to Miami, there was no question in my mind that the Rebbe is still operating. No question. I walk in and I say to my now boss, God bless her, I said, I sent you a lot of tapes over the years. And I did. I must have inundated her with so many tapes. She said, yes, you were very persistent, but now I just felt was the right time for you. I started the job at WSVN in Miami, and everything went smoothly. Because I had started in the summer, thank God, God blessed me with Breaking Big Stories. It's the Fox affiliate in Miami. I had no real challenges until the space shuttle blew up on a Saturday. And I was sitting in shul. And here I am, I'm sitting in shul, and there are people next to me saying, hey, did you hear the space shuttle blew up? And I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, we had pagers at the time. They must be trying to reach me left and right. So I had to make a decision then. And the decision that I made really changed the course of my life. With Shabbos, there is no compromise. There isn't one Saturday you're going to do it, the next you're not going to do it. It's all or nothing. So I knew if I went into work, as I heard these people gossiping about the space shuttle, for me, my heart was beating. Because here I was, this young reporter. People would think I'm nuts, right? But you know why I didn't go into work? I didn't go into work because I knew that the Rebbe had blessed me with this job, and I had to deal with the Rebbe. So I sat there in shul. And this, my friends, these are the times of Mashiach. When you have a Jewish kid who sits in shul because he's seen the miracles from a leader of a generation, that is the time of Mashiach. And I didn't go into work. And sure enough, one of the managers there after Shabbat said, Rosh, where were you? We were trying to reach you. And I said something which was very interesting. I said, you know what? It was my Sabbath and God comes first. And it was an incredible freedom. To this day, when I speak to audiences, especially children who grew up in the Rebbe's community, who want to be free, right? They want to live life and be free. What they don't realize is that when you have restrictions on your life and God comes first, that is the greatest freedom in the world. Because then you don't work. You don't work for man, you work for God. But because I had to go through that struggle, I was able to really feel and see that. And I was blessed with story after story. I would somehow always get the big exclusive interview. I was one of the only reporters to interview O.J. Simpson, for example. I was one of the only reporters to interview a guy named Scott Rothstein who ran a big Ponzi scheme in Florida. I would get all the big stories. But there was something missing. My wife and I had not had children yet. And so, what did we do? We wrote a letter to the Ohel. My firstborn child was conceived a day after that note was dropped off at the Ohel. And while my father was here physically, it gave him such nachas to see my firstborn know Hebrew better than his father and his grandfather. Because you see, that is the secret to Jewish power. The secret to Jewish power is Jewish continuity. Because they can never take that away from us. The only people that can take that away from us is us. Go look at the statistics, everybody. Post-Holocaust, more than 6 million Jews have assimilated. And one of the stories that always impacted me was a story of a man who went to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told him or asked him to put on tefillin, and this man said, no, I'm not into that. And the Rebbe said, you don't have a choice. You put tefillin on for all the hands that would have put tefillin on, but couldn't. And so that was my mindset of keeping Shabbos and being an example. That it wasn't just my self-sacrifice. It was for all the Jews who wanted to keep Shabbos but couldn't. All the Jews that would have sanctified God's name but couldn't. But like anything else in life, this is not a story of rose petals. There were challenges. After 2 beautiful children, my wife had miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage. So finally, I'm overjoyed. She gets pregnant. A pregnancy holds. It's 4 months in. And after these repeated miscarriages, what happens is they call you a high-risk pregnancy, and they have to put you through a detailed ultrasound. My father being in the medical profession, I knew on the day we went in for that ultrasound that it wasn't great news because the technician said, the doctor wants to see you, which is never good. So the doctor walks in, and I said, doctor, just tell me what's wrong. And the doctor says, the baby has a single umbilical artery. I said, what is that? He says, usually the umbilical cord has 2. This has 1. It could lead to growth restriction. I said, so what does that mean in simple language? He says it could mean the termination of the pregnancy. I said, so what are the odds? He said, 60% failure. And he said, I'm sorry, Rashi. Doctors, we are a people of numbers. And I said, doctor, that's great, because Jews, we are a people of miracles. So what did I do? I went home. I booked a JetBlue flight, leaving Fort Lauderdale at 6 o'clock in the morning and returning at 9:30 p.m. at night. But this time, I went to the Ohel, and I did it right. I spent the entire day there. And in this letter, I wrote the following. I said, Dear Rebbe, as you know, we have been going through trying times, and you speak about Amunah and Betachon. The Rebbe said that there's a difference between faith and trust. That faith is not such a big level. Most of us, at the end of the day, have faith. Right? Most of us. Trust in God is a different level. And the Rebbe said that it's that trust in God that breaks barriers. And he said the reward for trust is measure for measure, but multiplied. So I utilized the Rebbe's own words in this letter. And I said, Rebbe, I have trust. I said, this is what the doctor says. Let this be my biggest baby yet. And in return, I knew this from my father. In return, I will go from a Chabad house to Chabad house, from Jewish institution to Jewish institution, and use my God-given gift to inspire Jew after Jew after Jew. That baby was born. It was an emergency C-section. And as the baby was being brought out, the doctor said, Mazel tov, this is your biggest baby yet. The doctor had said the exact words that I had written in that letter. So when I began tonight and said that this isn't a talk, this is a conversation, that we're a part of a deal I made with God and the Rebbe, that's what I was talking about. And so now you have to do your part. Now you have to walk out of this room after I'm done speaking and be even more inspired. Because if you see a Jew like me up here, and I have these stories, how much more so for all of you who are connected to the Rebbe, who are the Rebbe's literal children and grandchildren, who live in the Rebbe's community. How much more so for each and every one of you to feel this source of power and strength and trust. Because when you connect with that, it impacts every area of your life. It impacts every story that I do. Several years ago, some of you may have seen that story of that little girl in North Miami Beach who fell into a pool. Her name was Eliza Schwab. And I got a call right before Shabbos from her family saying, Rashi, you need to do something. She's in the hospital and they're going to pull the plug. Because post-Terry Shivo, it was not parents who could make that decision. It was the doctors. So I told the mom, please send me a picture of your daughter, because I needed to personalize the story. And this was the most beautiful little girl, blonde hair, blue eyes. I wound up doing the story on Eliza, and Eliza was released from the hospital in a makeshift hospital bed, but at least she was able to go home. I did the live shot, when we're live on television, inside of her home, when Eliza came home. And our executive producer, who's not Jewish, calls me afterwards and says, there's no doubt a higher power put you in that room. Eliza survived in that home for 4 years. At her Shiva, her mom came over to me and said, Rashi, thank you for giving me 4 years with my daughter. This source of power impacts every area of your life. Like the story I covered, which many of you know about, of Yosef Roxon, who was walking down the street on a beautiful South Florida day, going to say Tehillim on Shabbos Mavorchim, when he was shot and killed. And I was the first reporter to do that story after Shabbos. And you could ask yourself the question, if Yosef Roxon would have stayed in bed, he may have still been alive. So where's God? It's interesting, because just recently, 2 weeks ago, the suspect in the case had all the charges dropped. So there's no justice right now for his family. And I asked his daughter a question off camera. I asked her that question. I said, where is God? And she told me the following story, and she gave me the permission to share it all with you tonight. She said when she was a little girl, she was here in Crown Heights, and after all this happened, her mind went back to a moment when she was that child, and she was in line for dollars, and you know those lines could get rough, and she was hit and she fell down. And all of a sudden she felt a hand on her face, and it was the Rebbe's hand. And the Rebbe kept his hand on her little face. And she said to me, it's almost as if the Rebbe knew I would need that comfort 30 years later. It was almost as if the Rebbe knew that there are no answers sometimes, but that the Rebbe knew that I was being watched. See, even through the toughness of being a reporter and through these tragedies of being a reporter, you see when you're connected, even when you don't have the answers. Because I know if I went through this room, to each and every one of you, you all have issues, because I have a lot of issues. And I know sometimes you have a lot of questions. And that's okay. Because as it said in last week's Parsha, when they ask you the question tomorrow, right? Put the question off to tomorrow. Don't allow it to affect your action today. And I see this time and time again in my stories. Like a story I covered just recently, and when you leave here tonight, you can see all my stories if you Google Rosh Low. I have a segment, The Lowdown. It's a fancy name. And my photographer came across this man who was incredible, and you can see the video if you go on YouTube and see it. He was pinned underneath a car. And my photographer thought it was odd, so he took this video, and of course, he called me, and I wanted to know what the story was behind this guy, right? And we followed him after he was freed from underneath the car to the hospital. And he told me the following story. He said he saw an accident. He got out of his car to help the victims of that accident when he himself was hit by a car and pinned underneath the car. He said that some woman came along who he had no idea who she was, and she kneeled down and she held his hand. And he started to cry, and he said, this woman disappeared and she was my angel. I don't know who she was, but she was so important. I said, why was she so important? He said, because she gave me hope. Having her hold my hand gave me hope. I really do believe if I didn't have that hope, I wouldn't have survived. We aired the story. This woman showed up at our station the next day. The two of them were reunited. But you know what I thought about when I did that story? That's what the Rebbe did for all of us. He gave us hope. The Rebbe reached out his proverbial hand to all of us when we were in our own situations, when we felt suffocated by life, and gave us hope. That's how important it is. And unfortunately, it's taken for granted sometimes. I see it all the time. How people who grew up with jewels throw those jewels away. And my job for the Rebbe is to make sure that every single child of the Rebbe returns. Because nothing else matters. You know, the Miami Herald, which you should look at this article, came to do a story on me about my career as a child actor. And I made sure in the story not to talk so much about child acting, but to talk about how I was the only Shomer Shabbos television reporter in the country. Why did I do that? Because the Rebbe said that it's important to publicize miracles so that other people can have faith. Because sometimes, I have to tell you this, sometimes it doesn't make sense. But the source of our powers in the mitzvahs that sometimes don't make sense. Because if it made sense, it would be too easy. Recently, I read this story that I wanted to share with all of you of a 19-year-old kid from right here in Crown Heights who went down to Boca Raton. And he made it his mission. He's idealistic. He wanted to go into old age homes, nursing homes, and make minions, put tefillin on with people. And he went into one area there, and he saw this elderly guy in a wheelchair, and he said, be part of my minyan. And the man said, I have no interest in being part of your minyan. This 19-year-old said, what do you mean you have no interest in being part of the minyan? He said, I think it's all hogwash. I have no desire to be part of your minyan. So the 19-year-old kid had the presence of mind to say, okay, that's fine. You don't have to be part of the minyan, but I'm just curious, why are you so angry? And he said, I'll tell you why I'm angry. My father and I were in Auschwitz together. And when it came time for my bar mitzvah, my father hid a pair of tefillin underneath the ground. The morning of my bar mitzvah, my father went and dug up the tefillin. The SS caught him, and as his punishment, they shot him in the back of the head in front of me. And I said at that moment, God, I will never do another mitzvah. So don't you, a 19-year-old kid, come in here and tell me to be part of your minyan. So the 19-year-old looked at him and said, I want you to know something. For decades, you have been separated from your father. Your father died trying to connect with God. By you disconnecting yourself from God, you've disconnected yourself from your father. It was a brilliant statement because the very next day, this man said, I want to be part of your minyan. He was part of the minyan for 2 weeks and he passed away. And his daughter wrote a letter to this rabbi, which is actually published. And that letter reads the following. It says, "Dear Rabbi, I want you to know my father was a miserable human being his whole life. He hated people, and he certainly didn't like God. The last 14 days were the happiest days of his life." That is Judaism. Even when it doesn't make sense. Even when you have to deal with the hardships, you come home and you're part of it. I began tonight speaking about Yechiel Moshe, my grandfather. You remember? My fourth son's name is Yechiel Moshe. And Yechiel Moshe, thank God, who's 3 years old, has been at shul every single Shabbos. Thanks to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Thanks to the Rebbe seeing my father. Thanks to the Rebbe being kind to my father. Thanks to the Rebbe reaching out and impacting my father's life. And now it's up to us. When that Miami Herald article was run, I got a call from a friend of mine who I went to high school with in Rye, New York. And he said, "Rosh, I had no idea that you had become an Orthodox Jew." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I have to confide in you about something. I married a non-Jew, and we have big crosses in our home. I have 3 children, and every time I walk down the staircase, it bothers me. What should I do?" And I said to him, "Joshua, what do you expect?" You see, that third little boy, my biggest baby yet, I named him Yeshaya Lev. Because Yeshaya spoke about a time when the knowledge of God will cover the world, like waters cover the sea. The Rebbe brought godliness into my life and into all your lives. And now it's up to us, as the Rebbe said. But what does that really mean? It means it starts in our own families, that we don't ignore the problems, that we do in-reach in our communities, because outreach is not enough. It begins in our own homes, with our own friends, simply reaching out to help. I will close with this tonight. At my workplace, there was a woman, and this is numerous years ago, her child had gotten ill. And she's a pretty powerful person. And so powerful, you can't just walk into her office. So I went to her secretary and I said, "Can you please find out what her child's Jewish name is?" I got home that night and my wife said, "You did what?" The secretary got back to me, and the next day I had a meeting with this person, and she said, "My child doesn't have a Jewish name. What do I do?" So I put my rabbinic shoes on, and I said, "Well, on Thursdays the Torah is out. We could do a Misha Barak. Why don't you call your father? Where does your father live?" She says, "My father lives in Palm Springs, California." I said, "That's great. We'll call your father up to the Torah, and we can give your child a Jewish name, because her husband was not Jewish. So sure enough, on Thursday, she shows up at the shul. Her father, who was in his mid-80s at the time, gets called up to the Torah, and the rabbi goes, ask him his Hebrew name. So I look at him and I said, what's your Hebrew name? And he says, Menachem Mendel. I said, what? He said, Menachem Mendel's my Hebrew name. He got up to the Torah and he started to cry. Because it happens like that. A Menachem Mendel with a granddaughter who doesn't have a Jewish name. A Menachem Mendel with a granddaughter who doesn't have a Jewish name. And it took me to walk in there and say, what's the Jewish name? To scratch the surface and to give a girl a Jewish name. It took me. So let's continue the pact I made with the Rebbe. Each and every one of you, when you leave here tonight, and it's interesting because I speak at Chabad houses a lot. So you're a bit of a tougher crowd. But I'm sure that we can all improve in one area of our life. In the merit of my father, and in the merit of our leader, take it upon yourself to say, boy, that Rosh Lo really inspired me. Right? Right? And I'm going to do something more. Thank you, everybody.